So the last talk of this whole workshop by Ariel Meirav from University of Haifa. And Ariel has a handout, which I'm going to share with the, how do I do this?
Can you present it simply on, that would be great if you could just display it on the
I can do that, but I thought I could also send it over chat.
But
And
it would be nice for me even to be able to.
is it okay to just do both?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will send it over the chat.
Yeah, it has two sides. Is it cold or is it not cold? That is the question. I don't feel it's relative at all.
Hmm?
I don't feel it relative. Ooh,
Wait,
but
wait.
It is kind of blinding. So, I'll have to stick to this position.
Is this okay? Like, do people over Zoom?
Yeah, I can then move it. Can I move it?
Yeah, but let's make it a
Yeah.
tad bit bigger. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it okay like this?
Yeah.
And you can just scroll.
Yeah, I can scroll. And then the other side, how do we do
The other side is
Oh,
just
it's
you just keep going.
continuation.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Do you want this?
Yeah, I don't know if I need it. Do you mind if you can remember to remind me after 15 minutes so I know where I am?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so as the last Israeli speaker, I should also say I've not been assigned this task, and probably people wouldn't choose me as a representative, but I will say thank you very much. It's been really a very enjoyable gathering, and especially pleasant, and thank you guests from Germany and from different places in Israel. It was for me a pleasure of the just very say warm and constructive and positive sort of exchange of ideas and not non-competitive. And it was really a pleasure. Thank you. And of course, it was very interesting. So I want to talk about unity. Now, I want to say some. Is this working? Am I sort of? So I just want to say, as an introduction, I want to say first of all what I mean by unity and why I think that it has some. Discussing this has some perhaps epistemological consequences or implications, though I'm not really going to be talking about epistemology. Yes, so first of all, by unity, I have a specific notion of unity in mind. It may be called a relational unity. So to say that X is unified with Y is simply to say that they share properties. So you can have unity to different degrees. You can have two X and Y sharing few properties, many properties, and indeed perhaps all properties. So that's where the notion of strict unity comes in. By strict unity, I simply mean the relation between X and Y if X and Y share all of their properties. And this I even take in a particularly strong sense of sharing not only the property types that they possess, that they have instances of, but the instances themselves. So strictly unified objects have exactly the same, possess exactly the same property instances. Now, I want to say first of all that in general unity, not necessarily a strict unity, seems to have at least an implicit large role in metaphysics. Some of the most famous positions in metaphysics are really claims of unity. I think Thales, the progenitor or the beginner of our philosophical tradition, is famous for two statements, both of which are really simply statements of unity that obtains between all objects in the world, namely that all things are made of water or originate in water, and all things are full of gods. These are examples of sort of very ambitious unity statements. And you can see the same thing with Heraclitus. You just take your examples. You can see a similar thing about Plato and the forms, about Aristotle and metaphysical structure, and et cetera, et cetera. So this seems to be an important ambition of philosophy. It seems that philosophers come out to the world and say, this is what I have to say. The world, or some particular part of it, some particular domain, is characterized by these unity relations. Now, I want to talk especially about strict unity, and I want to explain why specifically. So I want to, just moving into number 2, my motivation for inquiring about strict unity is, first of all, it seems to be intrinsically interesting to explore, if we think of unity as suggested by what is the historical comments I made before that unity is a kind of norm or ideal of guiding philosophical inquiry. So we might think, what would be the perfect or the maximal realization of this ideal? That would be to find perfect unity or strict unity. This is kind of a sleight of hand. You don't have to agree with me with that, but it seems to be interesting to think what the maximal embodiment of that kind of relation consists in. What does it say about whatever domain of reality it speaks of? So that's one point. And another is perhaps a more powerful and direct point, that I think that in a few domains, but most famously and obviously, I think in the case of intuitions about persistence, it seems to be a completely widespread, commonsensical intuition that that we have differently located objects, or yes, differently located objects that are strictly unified with one another. That is, Lewis sitting and the later Lewis standing. It seems that if we want to think of it as Lewis doing these things at different times, we seem to be committed to the strict unity between the first Lewis and the second Lewis, or Lewis at the first time at T1 and Lewis at T2. Now, if you look at theories of persistence and those that embrace this common intuition, namely endurantists, and for example, the most famous proposal is perhaps the oldest proposal is to assume that we can understand. First of all, they reject strict unity, as far as I understand. What the approach is to say, let us first of all translate or rephrase or understand in a new way the properties. Instead of the intrinsic properties of sitting and standing, we have relations to times, or some version of that. Now, the problem, so here's, I think, the problem with accounts of endurance, which do not make use or recognize the notion of strict unity. One problem is that I think this picture ends up with really sort of analyzing away change, because the picture we arrive at is a picture. I haven't shown it in detail, so I'm sorry if ideally I would show the details of this proposal. But we have at T, instead of sitting as a property, we have sitting at T1 and standing at T2. And we have instances of the same properties at the later time. So that seems not to show us, any real account of real change. That's one problem. The other is that we still, on this account, have different instances at T1 and T2, and it seems that Leibniz's principle of indiscernibility of identicals requires sameness of instances. That's at least how I understand the principle. So such accounts seem to be a certain compromise, which don't really recover our common intuition. There are other examples of cases where we seem to be committed, or at least there is kind of an inclination to think that differently located objects, whether in space or in time, are strictly unified with one another, and we'll see some more of that later. So, assuming that we are motivated, now let's consider whether at 3 here, is it really possible for differently located objects, whether in space or in time, to be strictly unified with one another? Of course, objects that are not differently located, that is, they're located at the same place, that doesn't seem to be problematic. Indeed, it seems to be almost obviously the case, and necessarily the case, that they will be strictly unified with one another. But my focus is on differently located objects. That's where also the object, the problematic character of strict unity confronts us. So now I think that there seems to be an intuitive resistance to that. Suppose we have, how could it be the case that we have we have an object at one location and an object at another location, whether or not they have different properties, or can it be the case that they share the same property instances? It seems that they cannot, and when we think, we seem to have almost a violent intuition that this is impossible. It's obviously false. But when I try to think of why that is, what is that powerful intuition based on, it seems to me that it ultimately boils down to our commitment to an assumption about property possession, namely that it is necessarily local. So an object can possess a property only if it is located, only if the property instance is where it is possessed. The position of the location of the possession and the location of the instance that is possessed must be the same. So we're really ruling out possession at a distance. But why? Why should we rule out possession at a distance? Now consider that the basic metaphor that the foundation of the metaphorical notion of property possession, ordinary possession, is completely indifferent to location. There's no locational constraint. I possess a car, it is not here. I possess all kinds of other things. These are, of course, different kinds of possession, but these are not property possessions. But that doesn't seem to be a problem. And furthermore, there are other, is it because we think relations cannot be diachronic or diaspatial? No, because we are familiar with relations that are of that sort. Even if we think that possession is a non-relational tie, it's not clear why that should be impossible. So I am thinking of I think that the cases where intuition drives us to acknowledge strict unity are really provide us with reasons for rejecting localism about property possession and accepting non-localism about property possession. Now this opens many, many new possibilities, which I want to now present to you just a few examples of what things would look like. Now, I think the interesting point about it is, remember, we were trying to look for the maximal sharing of properties, but now there comes into view this odd consequence that no matter what qualitative difference or property differences there are among different places, this would be consistent in principle with the assumption that the objects in those positions that possess them are strictly unified with one another. Consider, for example, the first, so what this looks like is, I'll scroll down a little bit. Where's the mouse? The scroller? Oh, in here. Okay, thanks. So, okay, so, yeah, so look at the first example. Suppose Lewis is just sitting for a while, and that still cannot, unless we acknowledge non-localism about possession, that would not be a case of, you could not assume identity. By the way, I should have said, okay, no matter. Things have not been perfectly said. But if the assumption that what happens diachronically is a case of strict unity, and it requires that we assume that property possession at T1 will stretch out to, we'll have a branch in T2. There will be items possessed at T2 and at T1. Okay, now here they are of the same type, so they are two distinct instances. But otherwise, we could not, even in this case, assume that X and Y are identical to one another because of the Leibniz constraint. Now, similarly, if you introduce
15 minutes.
15 minutes, great. So next we go to sitting and standing. So there's no particular problem here once we acknowledge the possibility of non-local property possession. No problem with that. And we have, in fact, a very simple reply to the problem of temporary intrinsics. It's not a problem. It hardly rises to the status of a problem given our embrace of non-local possession, which I think is interesting because, and note that we have not only that, we have real change because we have different properties at different times, which we don't get with relationalism. And what was the other thing that we needed? Okay, so we have different times and uncompromising identity, because there's no problem in assuming, from a Leibniz point of view, we don't have any problem in assuming that they are strictly identical, X and Y, because they have exactly the same property instances. Okay, so let's go further. Now, the diversity here could be huge, and we can think now that would be spatial location, okay? That'd be L's. So think of two, in principle, now these are less obviously required theoretically, but they open up really interesting options. We can, without inconsistency, assume cases if we find reason to think that there are such, from other directions of consideration, then we can easily accommodate the assumption that x and y that are differently located are identical, numerically identical with one another, and that requires, of course, that they have precisely the same property instances, and this is what we can assume that they have if we assume that that property possession can be remote. Okay, so and you can have anything. You put a finger and a foot. You could do one person and the whole world. You can generalize on locations. They don't need to be separate. They can be included. They can be any kind of variation of or difference in location would work. So now I want to look at, so this is what it would look like. I haven't shown, now what I'd like to say is once we adopt this point of view, we see that this is a very powerful, I mean, you might think that because it's so easy, it just adapts to any qualitative difference, and maybe it is a kind of it can't explain anything because it fits every situation. So it wouldn't distinguish between, there wouldn't be a distinction, an interesting distinction between cases in which there are cases in which there are strict unity relations and cases in which there aren't. However, what I want to say to show now that a number, I think a large number actually, but here I only present a small number of very well-known metaphysical puzzles seem to disappear under this conception. Simply, they don't really start to present a problem, I think. So let's look at Tibbles. I guess most of you or all of you may be familiar with this paradox or this puzzle. Now, the story is that our cat has lost its tail. This is what we find at an earlier time, the cat with the tail, and then at T2, the cat without the tail. And now, if we consider the parts, some of the part that has been lost, and the rest of Tibbles, we find that we are attracted to. Not only attracted, maybe committed to assumptions that lead to a contradiction. So let's just review them quickly. We have, first of all, the intuition that Tibbles at T1, this is the cat, is identical, numerically identical to Tibbles at the later time. Why? Because Tibbles has not died, has survived the accident. It still exists. So that means that the later one is numerically identical. Now, why is this? Oh, sorry about
Just
that.
click somewhere. Just click on the PDF. Yeah, and click again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So next, Tibbles at time 2 and Tib at time 2. They seem to be identical because it's one and the same thing, it would seem, right? And if you look at 3, we have Tib at time 2, which is a tailless cat, and Tib, the major part, at T1 also seem to be identical because, well, nothing happened to Tib 1. It was entirely, it was unmoved by, and unaffected, as it were, by the accident. And finally, it seems to be unavoidable that we assume that Tibbles at T1 is not identical to Tib at T1. Tib is this, Tibbles is the whole cat, and Tib is the major part. Now, why does it seem compelling to assume that they are distinct? Because they have different weights, they have different shapes, and that seems to be not what we would expect of identical objects. So if you add all of these things up, you get that Tibbles at T1 is not identical to Tibbles at T1, and that's an unpleasant result. So there are many proposals for solving. Perhaps the most familiar one is to assume that Tibbles and Tib are not at the second time. They are coincident objects, distinct coincident objects. There are all kinds of problems with that assumption, and I won't go into them now. But I just want to demonstrate how the explanatory power of strict unity, like pointing out that we can immediately deny that there is a problem simply by assuming that Tibbles and Tib are identical to one another, even though they have different properties. How would we say that? We would say that Tibbles has the properties of being a whole cat shape with a tail at this location, and a different property, and also different weight, and whatever you want to. There are two locations here, basically. So we can again say there's X at one location, Y at another location. They have very different properties that shouldn't disturb us because of the crisscrossing property position at a distance. So that's with Tibbles. Do I have a few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
6 minutes, yeah.
good. So now the problem of the many, another famous metaphysical puzzle with many proposed solutions. And here again, the idea you have to think of the cat as having a vague boundary, where there's no fact of the matter. It's a vague matter where exactly the boundary of the cat is placed. So we have no justification for identifying Tibbles as having one of the boundaries rather than any of the other. So it seems that we have two candidates which cannot be reasonably decided between. And in fact, there are millions or billions or trillions or however maybe Googleplex many of these. And so then it seems that we must accept the conclusion that either there are many cats or there's none. Now, all of this is immediately resolved if we assume that these different, that the objects occupying these small, in a minor way, different locations are identical to one another. Again, strict unity allows us to assume this consistently, right? So we have the material constitution, we have the problem of the many, and if I have time to suggest, I haven't included in the handout because I thought I would take more time.
You can also go over a bit. It's not a big deal. But you have a few more minutes.
No, so let me just give different kinds of examples of how our view of basic features of objects is affected by introducing this possibility. The special question of composition. Now, if we are to accept the proposed solution to the problem of temporary intrinsics, then we think that erase that, the problem, Tibbles' problem, any object of that sort that can lose parts and maintain its and survive that, we can if that might be a quite good criterion for a moderate view of composition. Now, then we can suggest that the answer to the question is simply wherever an object is a plurality of differently placed objects composes an object, a whole, if and only if those, first of all, those objects, those objects included in the plurality are strictly identical to one another, strictly unified with one another, and perhaps we should add that also the whole that they composed would be also strictly unified with all of them. Now that kind of situation I would call a whole of that sort a monad. So really we would be giving something like a special composition question for monads. But these are a very large category of the objects that might interest us. Just a last point, so a suggestion, again, these are only brief sort of hints at areas of application. I think there's this relation of strict unity offers us a very simple way, it seems, to distinguish between wholes and collections. Anyone who is interested in that, who is sympathetic to there being a fundamental difference between wholes and collections, might say something like this, that a whole is, as I said, this kind of strict, that's kind of monad or strict monad, which is identical to each of its composing parts. But a collection is a whole or a sum, whatever we want to call it. Let's say a sum, a different kind of a whole, which we call a collection, is such that the whole is not identical to its composing parts. So that you have a very sharp distinction between these two, and I think it also agrees with a kind of perceptual intuition that in the case of the collection, we seem to be presented with many things. That's how we construe the situation, as many, although wrapped into one thing. While in the case of the whole, we are not thinking of it as a plurality, though we can, if we want to, we can address that there are many parts and then think about a collection of the parts. But we can distinguish between the two notions by following relations of strict unity. And yeah, so that's kind of a beginning of trying to apply this idea to various fields. Thank you.